Welcome to In the Lab with Hoopsology. I am your host, Matt Thomas, joined as always by my co-host and best friend, Justin Goodrum. Justin, how you doing, man?
Doing good. Doing really well. How about yourself?
Doing great. We just recorded another In the Lab that I think you're going to be really excited to listen to. That's going to be dropping on Thursday on our channel and podcast feed, going into the ins and outs of the growing pains with the WNBA and their newfound success, as well as Caitlin Clark and Team USA and that news. So be sure you tune into that. Be sure you also tune into all the great content that we already have on our podcast feed. We just interviewed Jay Alphonse Nicholson, and I think you'll really enjoy that interview if you check it out. And you'll have a lot of great background info on the FX series Clipped by checking that interview out. So check that out and all our other great content. We've seen, again, another booming week on our channel and on our platforms. So just want to say once again, thank you. We really appreciate you all, and we appreciate you getting involved in the conversation and sharing and liking our show. So thank you, as always, for making this show possible. So, Justin, we have big news in the NBA and around the league, some of it off the court, some of it on the court. We're going to start off the court, and then we'll wrap things up by updating everyone through 2 games in to the NBA Finals at this point, at the time of recording this episode. You may hear it, hopefully, just before Game 3 tips off, which will be tomorrow, Wednesday night of this week. So let's get into these headlines. Big news over the weekend and into the start of this week that the Lakers had targeted head coach Dan Hurley from the University of Connecticut, UConn, the Huskies. Of course, probably the hottest coaching commodity in college basketball right now with those back-to-back titles. And there was a lot of back and forth. It seemed like things were pretty squared away for a $70 million deal over multiple years to bring Dan Hurley to the Los Angeles Lakers. Seemed like it was really going to happen. And then all of a sudden, the plug is pulled on this deal, and Dan Hurley decides to pass on this head coaching opportunity. Justin, your thoughts just as you were watching this story and then hearing the news?
Yeah, crazy, huh? And also we had some beef with some reporters too, with Woj versus Shams. So
right,
that's sweep into this as well. Regarding Dan Hurley, from what I heard from a lot of different reporters and discussion out there, he seems really committed to UConn. And this Lakers opportunity was something that he had to really entertain just because of the money and just the prestige. I am not super surprised he turned this down. I think we talked about this in our text chain. You mentioned a lot of good points about the changing basketball landscape. However, I just think in terms of establishing a core brand, I still think that UConn carries a lot of weight, even though the complexion of college sports is changing. I don't think that's necessarily going to harm UConn. They might have, less talented players, but their players are still going to be better than like New Mexico or a lot of the other caliber programs within the country.
Well, and they're an established college basketball program. Nobody would doubt that. I mean, multiple titles among multiple coaches.
Agreed. So I don't see them being harmed in that manner from a UConn perspective in terms of long-term of the changing landscape of college sports. Another thing I don't buy is that this is a massive blow to the Lakers as a franchise. I'm like, they're the Lakers. I don't understand what's going to happen if they hire James Borrego or JJ Redick. I mean, are they really going to? They transcend the coach. The players matter more than the coach does. So I don't really understand how this is a massive blow to the Lakers in terms of their super long-term future. I mean, it's a blow now because they roll out the red carpet for Dan Hurley there, but I don't see it as a long-term situations where it's going to damage the long-term health and viability of the Lakers, in my opinion. I think it does speak to also just how much pressure there is in terms of this Laker job and how much really long term future this team has. I mean, there's only so many years LeBron's going to have in a Laker uniform. What's going to happen to Anthony Davis? There's a lot of pressure on his team compared to other jobs. So I just question, even though the money's great, is it worth the stress where he can get not nearly as much money, but at the same time, the money that he could make at UConn, I think might kind of closely equal this, and he can just be a god at UConn and have least pressure. So I don't know. I see his reasonings for staying at UConn, but as a Lakers franchise, I don't see this as this, they're being destroyed or this is some kind of thing that's gonna ruin the Laker name. I don't know. I think people are kind of overreacting to how much of an effect this is going to have on the Lakers in terms of long-term implications.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think, speaking personally, if I'm Dan Hurley and I get that offer, I think just speaking as a human being, it's kind of shocking to turn down a lucrative deal like that, and
Sure.
with
A lot of
no
money.
previous NBA experience, being one of the top 6 highest paid head coaches in the NBA. That's pretty impressive. And I think speaks to, there's been the positive comments that LeBron made about Coach Hurley that have resurfaced, back in April and during March Madness. So I think that's part of the reason is, that this offer pleases LeBron if you're the Lakers management side of things. My question is this. Well, actually, before I say this, I don't fault Dan Hurley for staying either. Maybe he's more of a coach that's interested, like you mentioned, in being like a dynasty coach, like Tom Izzo is still happy
Yeah.
at Michigan State. Coach K was happy for decades at Duke and building that dynasty. Maybe that's what he wants to do, and I can't fault him for that. What I'm wondering, as someone who follows the NBA closer than college basketball, did Dan Hurley get in the meetings with this team and smell weakness and see the fire burning in the building already? Because we're at a point with the Lakers right now where I don't think the next couple years, unless there are significant changes made to this roster, and we've talked about this on the show before, I don't think it's really fair to expect this team to do much more than the play-in tournament, given they had a fantastic season from Anthony Davis. LeBron wasn't terrible either. LeBron put up some numbers, especially given the number of seasons he's been in the NBA, over 2 decades now. Like, where is really the room for growth here? And I am wondering, though I don't have it confirmed, that maybe that's what Dan Hurley kind of sees. You have to take that meeting with the Lakers out of respect and to entertain the offer and just see what's out there, I think. And also, it's a great negotiating chip next time you go to the table with UConn. But ultimately, I wonder if he just doesn't really see potential to build a winner there.
No, that's true. I think that certainly would be the case. And it's hard when you have a chance to three-peat as national champions and leaving such a great spot. Money is not everything. And I think
Right.
for a lot of these coaches, legacy means more. And him just leaving just for a paycheck, I think he just seems more of a grizzled coach than that. So, yeah.
It'd be rough too to leave when you have the chance to do a historic three-peat as well. Like, just cutting that off to take another job would be a rough way to go. Though I certainly wouldn't have faulted him if his ultimate dream is to coach in the NBA. I don't think anyone faults him for leaving and taking this head coaching job. I do think also, you can speak to errors with the Lakers management over the past, especially since they won their most recent title in 2020. I think you can criticize a lot of the moves that they've made and things they've done. This isn't an offer that I would really criticize the Lakers for making. I like taking this shot at a well-known entity, even though it hasn't been in the pros. It's not like Dan Hurley hasn't been exposed to the pro game. He comes from a basketball family. I think he could succeed in the pros as well if he landed in the right opportunity and had the right amount of control over the situation. Not saying like a team president type of thing is required, but just if he came in and was able to have enough influence on his roster and decisions that were made in playmaking, which sometimes can be difficult for a coach to do and get a handle on in the NBA. So I don't know. I don't fault the Lakers management in a sense of going for this, because I find this more attractive of a head coaching hire compared to even like a JJ Redick, who seems like people are very hot or cold with him as a coaching entity. And I feel maybe even a little bit hotter about it than Coach Borrego, given like LeBron's on board as well, and we have a bigger track record, I would argue, of success here. Nothing against Coach Borrego.
Yeah, no, I think with the Lakers, it's just they pulled out the red carpet for Dan Hurley, didn't work out, and kind of back to the drawing board. Um, I just think it's such a tough job. I don't really being a coach is just tough in general, but the Lakers job just has so much pressure and expectations. It's a special person that's going to be successful there. So
Yeah, absolutely. And Uh, I don't know. I don't know when we're going to see a successful Lakers team as far as making even as deep of a run as they made just the year before this past year, getting to the conference finals. It feels to me like again, and there is that potential you could have the instant pivot for the Lakers, but it feels like if there's something big under there, I don't know. It's hard to imagine what that would be. There's not a lot of flexibility, but the Lakers are a team that obviously draws big free agents, and you never know. There is that outside shot of making a big splash. Justin, another thing that came up that Brian Windhorst reported, that you never know if this is just smoke and some strategy, smoke and mirrors here, so to speak. But there's also, I don't know if you've seen this, there's been reports that now JJ Redick's camp is a little bit disenchanted with being this second fiddle option as head coach. Sounds to me like a negotiating tactic, but do you have any sort of impressions on, JJ Redick looking around? I mean, a first opportunity as a head coach going to the Lakers feels a little bit to me reminiscent of Steve Nash, getting his first coaching opportunity, maybe being a little bit over his head, coaching that very, very talented and loaded Brooklyn Nets team that was such a disappointment that we've talked about on this show plenty of times. How do you think, is it warranted, the whole second fiddle thing? Do you think there's a negotiating tactic? Do you think there's still interest there from what you're seeing?
I think it's possible it's a negotiation tactic. I just question with a lot of these new head coaching hires. Like, I understand JJ Redick has a lot of basketball knowledge. Yeah, I think he's a great analyst. I like his content. But we saw it with Steve Nash, and I think we've seen it in both ways now, right? Jason Kidd, he had a rough beginning to his coaching career. Now the Mavericks are in the NBA Finals, so I think it can go both ways. But I'm just wondering, if you're the Lakers, why take a chance on this guy? Like, because he has a podcast and he's an analyst. Like, what? He has no coaching experience, right? Like, where's the coaching tree? And I just wonder, separating just giving opportunities to other coaches. I'm curious when you have I always bring her up, but when you have a Becky Hammon out there, and she's under the coaching tree at Popovich, and she's won multiple titles with the Aces. Where's her interview? I just wonder what makes him more qualified than her. That doesn't really make any sense to me. So I just wonder from JJ Redick, to answer your question, if from a point of view from JJ Redick, I'm like, you're getting one of the most high profile jobs in the NBA. Like, just for you to have your ego bruised because you're second fiddle, like, who are you?
Yeah.
Like, I don't come on, dude. Like, you have a great podcast empire, and it's one of those things. Do you really want to coach or not? If you're happy doing the podcast thing, cool. And if you want to coach, great. But it's trying to play this ego game, I just find kind of ridiculous. And from a Lakers point of view, I question, they've had these hires, they have not worked out. And I just wonder from JJ Redick and even from James Borrego, his track record too, in terms of teams he's coached, I feel like there's other candidates that are more qualified out there. Even like before Smart Jackson's interview, like if he's interested in coaching, I don't know. I just find it a little bit peculiar that JJ Redick's like the new flavor of the month, considering he has
Yeah.
no
Sam
coaching experience.
Cassell, another
Yeah,
name that's
like
been
you're
thrown
exact.
out quite a
Thank you.
bit.
Yes.
You bring up a great thing here, which is hiring JJ Redick doesn't feel like a move in a team that's potentially on its last legs in terms of like title contention and things like that. It doesn't seem like you hire a guy who's never done this before on the coaching level. It feels like a misstep if they bring in JJ Redick. And in my opinion, I know he gets along with LeBron great. We're going to talk about that, and maybe that has a lot to do with this job. You're right. He does have a great podcast. I'll point out too, Justin, you and I have a podcast. So Lakers, if
Oh
you're
my
interested,
goodness.
come reach out. We will
No
do it
thanks.
for less than 70 million. But
See, Coach Matt Thomas, I'll be your biggest cheerleader. You can have that.
all right, sign me up. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about JJ Redick, Justin. Unless I'm sorry, did you have anything else on this
No, I
coaching
don't.
update? All
No,
right,
we can move on.
let's
Yes.
move forward. And LeBron, as I just mentioned, is fond of JJ Redick. He's been doing about every week or so an appearance on JJ Redick's podcast. I'm sure most of you tuning into this are well aware that this is a thing that happens. Recently, it came up before the finals started. LeBron on JJ Redick's podcast just gushed about Kyrie Irving, which is a situation that if you know a little bit about your NBA history, you know that LeBron and Kyrie Irving played together. So it sets up this really weird scenario. You also know, if you know your NBA history, that while yes, LeBron did ask for and got Russell Westbrook, he also, behind the doors, it seems like allegedly was clamoring after that was all said and done to also bring in Kyrie Irving when there was a chance to potentially make that happen before Kyrie landed in Dallas. So just some things that were said here. LeBron talked a lot, as many people do, you and I included, like the beauty of Kyrie Irving's game on the court, his skills that he has that are really eye-catching, eyeball test wise. There's nobody that does it quite like Kyrie Irving. His layup package around the hoop, many say he has the best handles in NBA history. Some would argue with that, but a lot of people would agree with that, I think is fair to say. And LeBron, to quote another thing that he said to JJ Redick, quote, "I'm so effing mad that I'm not his running mate anymore," end quote, which is really, really interesting, I think. What do you make of this sort of Kyrie love fest that LeBron had here for a few minutes, about 3.5 minutes if you look up the clip for you, the listener, if you haven't seen it yet?
Yeah.
What do you make of this, Justin? I mean, are there deeper messages here? Is this just guys talking on a podcast like you and I do? What is going on here?
I think it's guys talking on a podcast. I mean, it also speaks to, some regret, I think, in terms of them as teammates. You have two alpha males, and they're both kind of similar positions. I mean, LeBron can play all five spots, but he can do stuff that's similar to Kyrie, and I think they clashed. And Kyrie's very much an individualistic person, and I think you can see there was a personality clash there. I think it's just guys talking. Like, I don't really see anything into it. Personally, I think LeBron reminds me a lot of Kobe at the end of his career, where you just don't care. You say what you want. I don't know if you noticed with Kobe's the end of the last decade of his career, he was basically just he'll say what he wants, where he makes you angry or not or whatever. And I think LeBron's been a lot more transparent. If you listen to his barbershop show, The Shop, that was on HBO, he is very different than what you hear in post-game press conferences. I mean, he's basically telling you what you want to know. He's very honest. So I think at this point, he's probably more free in terms of what he says now that his career is almost over.
Interesting. Yeah, I've always perceived it as LeBron being a little bit more tethered to growing his brand, being a little bit more reserved than Kobe was towards the end of his career. But you do bring up a good point that LeBron also has a lot more towards the end of his career content available for people to consume than Kobe did.
Mhm.
And maybe things would have looked differently if there was a bigger, player media side of things, when even as late as when Kobe was finishing up his career in the NBA, it was still a little bit different, not quite as open and vast as it is right now in terms of that player media front. So,
Yeah.
yeah, interesting point there. In terms of having this podcast, this is something I've been wanting to ask you for weeks, really ever since the JJ Redick Lakers coaching news came out. It just seems like this odd dynamic where you have this recurring meeting with a podcaster, and then all of a sudden he's brought up as, at the time before this Dan Hurley news, the leading candidate to be the Lakers head coach. Does it seem odd, or does it kind of trip any ethical wires for you that like LeBron's doing this podcast and then all of a sudden this guy is the head coaching candidate for the Lakers?
I think that's a fair point. I think because he played in the league, there's a precedent for other NBA. I don't know. It's one of those things where if something once happens, it's kind of more susceptible, and I think a lot of the fan base to understand, just in terms of there's been other former retired players to automatically get a coaching shot with no assistant experience or no head coaching experience. That's not unprecedented. I think from the podcast space, he's also an analyst too. I think where it gets tricky if JJ Redick never played in the NBA before, or he never played college basketball before. He just played high school. If he let's just hypothetically say this was Stephen A. Smith, like I think that would be dangerous. It's just how is he has like no experience at all other than to being an analyst. So I think that would be scarier. Um, but I think you bring up an interesting question. I think we're into a more dangerous territory here. I wouldn't pull it. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. I mean, look at how many players have podcasts now, and typically their host is not a player within the NBA. They're a media personality or they're a rising media personality. It's rare when players just. I mean, this is kind of I don't know, a unique thing within the new player media space. Is that with JJ and LeBron, they both play in the NBA. And even though JJ Redick's more considered a podcaster, he did play professionally at a high level, as well as played as Duke. And that's kind of not what you see with Durant's podcast or with Jalen Brunson or Paul George. Their co-host is usually, again, a media personality, a journalist. So I wonder will you'll see that crossover? I think that's a little bit more curious to me. But if he does get hired, yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm curious if this podcast stays around just from I don't know, a fan and from just an observer. I would love to see this continue, even if he's the coach, just to see their dynamic. I'm very curious. So we'll see. I think it's just across any ethical lines. I don't feel weird about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you
I think if he was under Clutch Sports, like if that was his agent,
sure,
then that trips more wires, and we're not that far removed from it. So it is very interesting that could be a possibility. I think what it does, though, ultimately is with it being so much in the public sphere, if Redick got in there as head coach, let's say, hypothetically, and the Lakers started, let's say their record was like 5 wins, 10 losses to start the regular season. I think you're going to have much, much quicker scrutiny of him, given who he is and these previous ties. People are going to be pulling that, maybe unfairly so, that like LeBron brought in his buddy. LeBron runs the team, runs the organization, and now he's ruined the team. They don't have a good head coach in place because of his power over this franchise.
yeah.
I think you would see that go off fairly or not. All right. Well, We've had a lot of stuff off the court. And again, our next episode, we'll be talking about the WNBA side of stuff happening both on and off the court and the booming that league has been having. But we have some very relevant basketball being played right now. In fact, by definition, the most relevant basketball in the NBA anyway that there is all year long. We are 2 games in to the NBA Finals, Justin. Last time we recorded, the finals had not tipped off yet. And I had picked Dallas in 7, and you had picked Boston in 7. And you had said that you think Boston's defense would be too much and would be the overall story of this finals. And Justin, to this point, I just have to give a tip of the cap to you, because that does seem to be exactly the way these first 2 games have played out. Both of these games, of course, Boston has home court advantage. So both of these games in Boston, and played out to a T as you predicted. You also predicted the series going 7. So I think both you and I, unless opinions have changed, we do expect the Mavericks to get something done here to make this interesting. In game 2, Kristaps Porzingis, I don't know if this was a re-aggravation or if this was a new injury, but I do know he is doubtful, questionable for game 3, which will be in Dallas tomorrow night at the time of recording this podcast. So, Justin, first I'll just ask your overall thoughts with seeing this go in many ways the way that you predicted to this point. What has surprised you or stood out to you?
First, what surprised me is just the emotion of Kristaps Porzingis in game 1. I mean, I've never seen him that animated before, and it was awesome. He seemed like he has had a point to prove. I mean, he was just destroying the Dallas Mavericks. It was awesome to see. So that was pretty amazing. What shocked me it speaks to the defensive ability of the Celtics is, Tatum, from an offensive point of view, not playing too well. He's 12 for 38. Yeah,
Stunk, I think you could say in some respects.
Yeah, 12 for 38 from the field, 28%, 0.6% for 3-pointers, averaging only 17 points a game, committing 4.5 turnovers.
Wow.
But look what he's doing, even though offensively not good, but 10 rebounds, almost 9 assists. I mean, and they are 25 points better than Dallas with Tatum on the court. So I think that speaks to them being over how stacked they are, being able to overcome him is scoring struggles. The question is, if Kristaps is questionable, I mean, he's going to have to step up. I mean, that kind of, with Kristaps on the floor, I think that's allowed Tatum to struggle offensively. And with Kristaps not in the lineup, I think it opens the door for Dallas in this series. So that's where I'm a little worried for the Boston Celtics. If Kristaps can't start, or he re-aggravates an injury, or if he's out for this series, I think the shooting numbers are going to have to improve for Jason Tatum. But as long as Kristaps is out there, he's taking up some of the slack. He's able to struggle. So that's been a surprise. I think Kyrie struggling, that's been a surprise as well. I expected him to have much better, especially him being a veteran of these moments. I think him struggling has shocked me as well. And also I think both games, them I think especially game 1, just being totally outplayed. That has shocked me as well. This Boston, usually you'll see the team that has the most rest struggle, and this Boston just put it on them. And I think game 2 was closer, but overall, I just expected it to be a lot more competitive so far.
Yeah, well said. I want to highlight what you mentioned about Kyrie's struggles, because it really is astonishing. And if you had told me this before these first 2 games happened, if you told me this statistic, I would have thought both of these games would have been blowouts. And really, I think it's a missed opportunity that the Dallas Mavericks didn't take game 2, because it was within their grasp, and they got away. They let it get away from them. They gave that to the Celtics in some respects. But part of the reason that happened, Luka Doncic leads all scorers in the finals so far through 2 games. I believe he has 62 points. That's not surprising. What is Kyrie Irving's ranking on scorers in the NBA Finals. He is ranked 8th among all scorers
Mm.
in the NBA Finals so far. And really, for the Mavericks to contend, I think you would have said he has to be at least top 5. I mean, maybe even arguably like top 4, top 3, if the Mavericks are really going to give a go at this stacked Boston Celtics team. I do think this is a case so far of we're just seeing a better, deeper, more versatile team not really have to deal with the consequence of not having the best player of the series, because their overall balance to this point is enough to overcome it. Even with those struggles that Tatum has had, as you've mentioned, they've got enough to go around that it just hasn't been a factor, and they can even let Luka go off. A lot of his numbers have been pretty impressive. They're able to make him work for the things that he does, but I think it was like 32, 11, and 11 that he had last game, and was pretty dominant up until the second half when things changed up in that game too. So how do you think the Mavericks should feel right now? We have the classic saying, I think probably every basketball podcast brings it up at some point every year, that it's not a true series, as Pat Riley said. It's not a true series until the home team loses. How worried do you think the Mavericks are, and how worried do you think they should be?
Oh, super worried. I mean, they're down 2-0, and I think especially game 1 is especially concerning. And again, if Kristaps is healthy, I do not like their chances at all. I think they got a great home court. I think you'll see with Kyrie and Luca, their ability to turn it on. I think they're capable of a couple of games at home. But in terms of the momentum, I just don't see them pulling themselves back into this series. I hope so, because I mentioned earlier, I've been disappointed within this year's edition of the playoffs. I just lots of blowouts. That's discouraging. The cool thing is that at least the ratings were up for game 2. So I think that's an encouraging sign, but I don't know how that's going to last if there's going to be blowouts in these games. So hopefully it's competitive. But if I'm the Mavericks, I'm freaking out. I'm really concerned right now.
The hope is, unfortunately, part of the hope is tied to the Porzingis injury limits his minutes, or maybe even limits his ability to play. Unfortunately for him, of course, but that's a big deal for the Mavs, and I think can help them be more effective on the offensive end, maybe have it not be quite as much of a struggle that it's been. Maybe Kyrie can get going a little bit more around the basket even. And the other thing that we need to see, the Mavericks role players have really, really been outclassed by the Celtics to this point. And maybe going back to home, where traditionally your bench does a little bit better for you compared to the road team, maybe that's something that we have yet to see that can be activated in this game 3 as they return to Dallas. I'll ask you this, Justin, because both you and I projected this going to 7 games. With what you're seeing, not asking you to change your pick certainly or anything like that, but would you hedge your bets on the series being done sooner than 7 games based on what we've seen so far?
I do. And especially if Chris, again, I keep saying his name, but if Porzingis is still in his lineup, it wouldn't surprise me if Boston wraps it up in 5.
Wow.
But I do think with him being questionable, I would say that gives the Mavericks a shot to at least stretch it to 6. But again, I like you're saying, their bench, and I just think the Celtics have so much depth, and not to mention offensively, when Tatum struggles, and then you can still pretty much handle your opponent like that. It's just hard to really have any hope of the Mavericks making a comeback, even with Luka and Kyrie, and especially Kyrie struggling as he has been.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think we're up to now, if I'm not mistaken, Justin, 13 games in a row that Kyrie Irving has not been able to beat the Celtics. So very interesting to see that streak continue. I will reserve hope that Luka can go insane and have a Luka game and get a game that way. So even if all things are true and that Boston is defensively dominant as they have been so far and the much better team as they have been so far, I think you can get a Luka game, and I think you can still get a combo Luka Kyrie game, maybe even a Kyrie game where he can go off and, in spite of what we've seen so far, and maybe surprise people and get them another game. So I still have my hopes high that this series is going to go 6 games, but I feel and will echo the same type of sentiment that you feel, that it doesn't look like we're headed to 7 games right now, especially with the condition that if Kristaps Porzingis is playing, let's say like more than 20 minutes a game, it feels like the buzz is true on the Celtics being a historically dominant team. That point differential statistic that I brought up last episode, that they are among the top 5 all-time teams. All those teams above them have won the NBA Finals. So it does seem like the Celtics are right in place to be among those former champions.
Yeah, no, totally agree.
We're going to get going. Let us know your guys' thoughts. Should Dan Hurley have taken that Lakers job? Lakers fans, let us know. Do you want JJ Redick as your head coach? Are you thrilled if they hire JJ Redick? And if not, who do you want as the next head coach to lead your franchise? Let us know about LeBron's love of Kyrie here. Could you see these guys running together again on the same team potentially within the next year or two, or however long LeBron decides to keep it going? And then finally, let us know, can the Mavericks make this a series moving forward? Always appreciate the discourse with you guys and your support. Thank you once again. We're going to wrap it up for this episode of In the Lab. Hope you enjoyed. For Justin Goodrum, I'm Matt Thomas. We'll be back soon. Peace out.
See you next time.